There you go.
So I'll call the Planning and Zoning Commission meeting to order. First item is roll call. Nelson. Oh, present. Recognize me. Mike Kane.
I'm also here.
Sue Sutherland.
Here.
Kevin Fitzpatrick.
Here.
And no Steve. So I'll appoint Kevin to sit for Steve. So we'll have a quorum.
Roger that.
Hmm.
I was just saying Roger that, sorry.
Okay. So the first item on the agenda is approval of minutes of previous meetings. I'll entertain a motion to approve the minutes of January 10th.
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second. Whoever.
It's moved and second. Does anyone have any corrections to the meeting?
I might, but I'm not sure. So we were voted in. But we know that the secretary is the vice chair / secretary.
Yes.
It doesn't say. So I just wonder,
Oh, yeah, what is, I mean, it doesn't.
this says you as president, me as secretary.
Well, it's because the secretary signs the meeting. You want to put it there?
No, but you're right. You're right.
It
And
should
that's,
be.
that's the memo that went to the clerk's office. It was
Okay.
vice chair, but you're right. Yes. Yep.
That's the office. So.
Yep. Yep.
Hmm.
The only thing that I would
That's probably happened.
add is on the first page, if it's, I don't even know if it's necessary, but it says downtown Mystic. Maybe if it just clarify that it's the Stonington side so that
Oh,
someone who's reading this doesn't think that it's,
Well, it was presented by the.
yeah, I realize, but it just makes it a little clearer because that can be confusing sometimes. At least to me. Can be to me.
Oh, I don't know. It says which will provide a public water taxi from museum to downtown. Yeah.
Just so long as it was
Yeah,
not
but-
going into Groton, though, is what they had made.
Yeah, but it's an area.
Okay, then leave it the way it
I
is.
think it's-
I don't care.
No, I mean, people may cross the bridge.
No, I know, but I would just, it doesn't, no, it's just a little, I saw it.
So we need to make sure things are green. when
That's
we're
correct.
happy.
Yes.
Hit your button.
That's right.
Just leave it on. You want to talk?
I had one minor item on page 3, report of commission. Everything that there was no report, it says none. So it should say none.
Mhm.
Just to be consistent with the house. So nobody thinks they're missing a page or something. Does anyone else have any corrections? If not, then we'll vote on a motion to approve the minutes of January 10th as amended. All those in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Motion is carried unanimously. The next one is meeting we have is January 17th, a special meeting nights. Only for the motion for approval of those minutes.
A motion to approve the minutes of January 17th.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Does anyone have any corrections? On this one?
I would like to put something in there.
Yes.
Back to you here again. It's that, I just noticed it incorrectly. It's that under the data center. It mentions that the reviewed Commissioner Gaines concerns regarding whatever there was. In the first portion for short-term rentals, I would like it to reflect the same thing that would be my concerns with not addressing the part of the industry that is non-owner occupied. Yeah, discussion about it. And it just doesn't say anything.
So we think by adding a statement at the end of that discussion on top of page 2 would be appropriate.
I think it's appropriate.
No, I think this making the statement's appropriate. Just
Yeah.
meant where to put it.
I think it's at
Yes, I think Yeah, it's important to show that all that was discussed was
Right.
discussed. And we didn't think that we ignored things or missed things.
So maybe the
Hmm?
bottom of the first paragraph, I'm not sure where it goes.
Well, I think just putting it, because it. I think it describes what was discussed.
Right in here. It
Says
seems like just the same kind of a thing, and then if
Says
someone's
the
looking at this,
commission
looking.
discussed the definition of the need for STR such enumeration. I just had. to say- Yeah, fine. This is what we discussed. As the previous paragraphs really. And what Jeff Davis was presenting. Does anyone have any other correction? Not, we'll vote on the motion to approve the meeting minutes of January 17th as amended. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Motion is carried unanimously. Next item is public communications. Does anyone on this commission have any communications?
I do not.
I
do
think
not.
we do have that email that we got from Debbie Schaffler on training.
Mhm. And I can go over that under report of staff.
But I think it
like-
should be identified here that we received it.
Okay.
The staff have any communications? Does anyone in the public wish to address the commission tonight? Everybody? Should we take the green sweater first? Take the green sweater first. You state your name and address for the record.
I have to do anything with this.
It's
Is this
on.
working?
It's on.
It's okay. All right. Yes. My name is Elizabeth Ray Beck and I live at 81 Main Street. And I'm here this evening to make a few comments on your draft data center regs, which we at GCA think are really very good. We're extremely appreciative of the carefulness with which this commission has listened to the community on this issue and addressed our concerns. We do have a couple of concerns and suggestions we wanted to make before you finalize those regs, hoping that we can. The first one is about standalone data centers. It's important to look into the future as you develop these regs. A difficult thing to do, but very important. The latest draft appears to allow standalone data centers, which can be problematic, even though the size is limited. We're interested in knowing why you are allowing these. The regs would be much tighter if a data center were required to be associated with a business. Data center technologies are rapidly evolving science. New technologies are probably going to reduce the size of the average data center at some point in the future, maybe very soon. Allowing standalones encourages speculators to come into Groton and find places to put them with possible significant harmful impacts on neighbors in residential districts due to noise and air pollution. At the very least, we suggest that any data center in an RU district must be attached to a home or a business. The second issue is noise. We're concerned that noise has not been addressed adequately. And my colleague Lynn Marshall, who's an audiologist with a lot of expertise in noise impacts, is going to speak to that. I realize it's complicated. I'm not sure, right? But to what extent the commission can address noise, or at what point it has to become an ordinance created by the town council. And finally, the diesel problem. Data center technology is evolving at practically warp speed. It's impossible to see what direction it's going in. But with the country increasingly concerned about CO2 and other emissions because of climate change, we suggest that board do an in-depth look at where backup generator technology is going. It's possible that within 5 years or so, most new backup generators will be battery driven, not diesel. It would be most unfortunate if we lock into a climate warming health hazard technology, which is fast fading. In addition to using backup systems of power interruption, companies will have to check them often, usually monthly, starting them up with plumes of diesel smoke going into the air. Connecticut's air quality is bad, and you have to check with Ledgelight Health District to learn that our summer months are extremely hazardous for people with asthma and other lung-related diseases. Multiple backup data centers around town are going to worsen our air quality. I am not sure what the solution is, but the commission could direct the staff of Horsley Witten to report back in a year or two as to the viability of alternative backup systems such as battery powered, and leave yourselves flexibility to change this requirement by inserting some language which says, or the least polluting, economically viable or alternative. So again, we want to express our great appreciation for the terrific job this commission has done in your draft regs. At the end of my remarks, I copied an email from a young man is in the data center business on the West Coast. Full disclosure, he grew up in Norway and his parents are friends of mine. He's a principal partner in his company and very much on top of what's going on in the data center industry. I just want to check his thoughts for further thinking. Thank you.
Jen. Yeah, Jen, did you want to speak?
Yield
Oh,
or temporarily.
Ladies first.
no. I was just going to order.
My name is Lynn Marshall. I live at 118 Pearl Street in Noy. And I have a PhD in speech and hearing science. I worked for the Navy at the Naval Submarine Medical Research Laboratory for over 30 years as a senior research audiologist. I did a lot of work. I know a lot about how noise affects hearing, how it affects performance. And as part of that, we did some measurements of noise. And I'm a member of the Acoustical Society of America. I chaired an American National Standards Institute committee on speech interference, measuring speech interference from noise. And as part of that great organization, I was able to attend some seminars on measuring community noise. So I know a little bit about that. I was really happy when the data center got moved from the town council to this group, because I've admired this group and your work for a long time, because you're so thoughtful and deliberative. And I'm just so glad that we have you here. And you do not disappoint, and this one as well. Thank you. I have a few comments. one before I get into noise is just on the section 5.1-6.f on the size. It said the size of any data center structure must not exceed 12,000 square feet. And just simply that needs a reference right there. So you know that it's, I think because of what you speak of right after that, it's gross square footage. But someone could come in and say, oh, you mean footprint, you know, that's how I interpret it. So that just needs a little. Now, the noise. I mean, that first sentence has got a lot of stuff in it. It's interesting. I mean, just first, you're saying all industrial uses must, it's the noise from all industrial uses. On a lot abutting property, the abutting property and measuring from the property boundary doesn't cut it. Noise, if everything was flat and there were no reflections anywhere, you're good to go. The noise will spreads out spherically and it decreases 1 over distance squared. But if you have hills, if you have any absorptive material, like dirt is a really good one. If you have reflective material, like walls, buildings, then that doesn't work. And so there can be measuring at the property line or talking about abutting, the noise level actually can be lower there than it is a little farther away. So you really need something more like a noise contour map that shows the noise, what the noise will be. Here's a big noise emitting source. I could give you an example of how that works if you want me to kind of explain it, or you want me to go on, I can. I'll go on. But the noise contour map actually will give you, here's a noise source, say it's 100 dB. You say, okay, in what area is it 100? Then we go on, where does it drop to 95? And it's not going to be just a perfect circle. You know, it will be depending on the topography and what objects could be reflecting it. It could be different. Noise engineers do this, they model. So with topographical maps and knowing what the structures are and the materials of those structures, those things, that's commonly done. So that's the abutting property issue. Then we get down to must match the wave signature. I don't know what a wave signature is. I haven't really heard that term used. And I heard the discussion in the last meeting, the recording from that meeting. And you were talking about the waveform, the peak of a waveform. Not a good idea. Here, this is just a little thing I downloaded today. It's just a cheap little, well, it's a free thing, but here's your waveform right here, recording the sound. And so you're talking about making measurements over the period of a week. That's good. But there can be a loud sound at any time. Look how that varies. And then if I go, bah, went off the scale, it would be way up there. Or if you, big transient. If I'm the developer and I want to make a noise and I want to have really high noise levels, what I'm going to do is go out near your microphone. I'm going to light off a firecracker. And then, but it doesn't have to be anything that's, necessarily malicious. Just these things happen in nature too. Some bird could get right near there and start, really squawking off for a short amount of time. And so what you're doing is, and you don't want to measure ever just to base it on the peak noise level, because you could have a peak noise level that's really high. You say, don't go above that in your background noise measurement, your baseline noise measurement. Well, you really care about that average. And I'm not an acoustical engineer, but they will look at different percentiles of the noise. But the peak is just, that's your 99th percentile. That's your unusual event. And so, and they're transients, very short sounds can really peak that thing. So that's not a good measurement to use. So. All right, so those are the. Yeah, and the next sentence, such measurements may be made each hour over the course of a week to determine noise levels over time. I don't know about the each hour, that may be all right to say it that way, but I would really run that by someone who was an acoustical engineer, because each hour, I mean, I thought that they often will just make continuous recordings over time, and however they choose to average that, what time frame they use, I know whether it's an hour that they're averaging over an hour, whatever. There's standard ways of doing that. So before putting that in there, I would really check to see what do the standards say? And how do professionals do that? This next, that they have to be taken with running at full capacity. That was great. I would put, determining peak noise levels. Yeah, that's important. And that's kind of noise, their peak noise levels, and that's a little different than that acoustical measurement of peak. That's how are you running at your loudest operating condition. But I think that's clear there. And I might put noise contour maps may be required. All that is good. Now then, you talk about the existing noise level table. That is, it's been a while since I've looked at these, but last time I looked, your regulations had a single table. This table, is that what's still? Yeah, that's out of date. So the state now, under those same sections, is quite a lot different. It got revised in 2015. And so the noise standards for the state are different. And actually, if you submitted yours right now, it would not meet their standards. They said that you can be you can be stricter, but you can't be any more lax. Yours are more lax. And they differ, in a couple of parameters. So now there's not just a single table. There's is considerably more complex. They talk about the emitter. They talk about three kinds of areas. There are areas that are industrial, which you presume they could be noisy. There's an and then a quiet, which would be residential or near churches or hospitals or open space, nature. And then there's something that's in the middle, and they have a lot of different uses that they put in each of those three categories. Then they have three tables where they talk about the emitter. So from an industrial area, they say they have it like the 1 dBA and they have the maximum noise level for day and night. But they say, okay, if I'm a sea level zone, what can the noise levels be in that sea level zone? Then if I'm emitting from a sea level zone, what can the noise levels be in the B zones around that? And if I'm in a sea level zone, what can they be in the A? And they go through from each emitter type to each receiver type. So that's current. The other thing they do is that they have actually added measurements for those, what you were talking about before, which was that tonal, that irritating narrowband tonal things that sometimes the big data centers at any rate have. And so they have that measurement so that you're measuring in narrow bands. A dBA is a broadband, low pitches to high pitches. They also have narrow band measurements, and you see if there is a component that sticks out above its neighbors, then that's that narrowband irritating component. So that is in that standard. And they also talk about the transient noises. So dBA doesn't cover that. So dBA, you're averaging over a period of time. And a transient is, just a very, like a gunshot or very brief. And so it gets lost in the averaging over time, even though its peak can be quite high. And it can, it can damage an ear, just one peak if it's high enough level. So they have limits for those peaks, those transient peaks. So all of that is covered in the existing standard for the state. So that is important to take a look at that. And I think that will cover some of the issues that you are talking about. So the question, I guess I'd say about that, it's like the question is like, what do you need now and where do you get it is the question. And I think that you need noise standards that are as all encompassing and as strict as what the state has specified. There are 66 towns, cities in the state of Connecticut that do have noise ordinances. So Groton's, a little bit behind on that. And where do you get them from? There are two choices. You can just take the states. That's the simplest and most direct way to do it. Just use what they have. You could write your own with the help of a good acoustical engineering company. And that, you have the possibility that they could be simpler, more elegant. They definitely would apply to Groton and what your concerns are. Is it worth all the extra time and effort? It depends on you have the staff and the people to actually get together and with a good acoustical engineer who does that kind of work and work with them through it. I mean, what I would tend to do just myself personally would be to really look at the state one and then to look at some other towns where I think, oh, that's interesting. That looks good. That looks good. That's good. And then sit down with the acoustical engineer and say, okay, I like this of this and this of this and this and this. Why wouldn't you do it that way? Because they're going to have a different opinion and they're going to say, oh, that's impractical or that's that. And I'd say, you convince me, and then I think pretty quickly you could get to something that would be good, but it may not be any better than what the state already has. So that's just the decision. The measurements are a little more complex than what you have now. So I don't know who does your noise measurements now or who calibrates your equipment or what equipment you use, how any of that is done. But that's certainly something that if you don't have that in-house right now, a good acoustical engineering firm that does this all the time can recommend equipment, train the equipment, can't calibrate the equipment for you probably annually. That's not difficult. What is really important coming in is that you have someone to evaluate proposals who knows what they're looking at. So when I was looking around the internet when the data centers were first proposed, there was an example there. There was a town in Massachusetts. And so someone who was proposing something that was going to be really noisy, and they had their acoustical measurements done by an acoustical engineer to say, this is okay. The town hired their acoustical consultant, who was from a really well-established firm, good firm. They reviewed it, and it was a beautiful analysis of it. And they said, you misuse that term, you use the wrong standard, and you need to do a noise contour map because of this, that, or the other. And that's something that most people wouldn't know. I learned by reading it. And so that's something really important to make this work for the community. And I don't know how you really get that done. I know what I saw. I was on the NOAC zoning commission for over 10 years. And we got an architectural design review for areas that we thought were really important. And one thing for historical purposes. And one thing there in those regulations said, because none of us were architects and had any real expertise or architectural historians. And so those regulations said that we could get the advice of an architect, seek that advice if we wanted to. That, when I was there, that was used twice. And in my opinion, there were many more times we could have used it. I was in the minority. And then in the past 10 years, I don't think it's ever been done. So that's the danger of that. So how do you actually make sure that that review gets done by someone who's professional, understands it? There's a tendency of, some commissions, I'm not saying you all all are pretty, you ask a lot of good questions and dig in. But it's I've seen it from my experience on the zoning commission, for people to say, oh, that's an architect, they know. Oh, that's an engineer, they know, and just accept it without too much challenge. So that's the danger. And so whatever you could do to make sure that you not only have these great requirements, but that you have a way to really make them stick would be great. Thank you.
Sean, did you want?
Good evening, members of the Planning and Zoning Commission. My name is Jim Furlong. I live at 57 Fishtown Lane in Mystic. I'd like to say a few words about the future of zoning regulations of data centers. At the outset, I'd like to echo what has been said by the two previous speakers. I have great admiration for how the Planning and Zoning Commission has dealt with this very difficult question. It's done so with intelligence, hard work, and needed courage. Groton is fortunate to be protected by this group. I'd also like to ask some questions and make a suggestion about data centers, while we still have time to make changes. Right now, there's what I would call a legal land grab underway in Northern Virginia by data centers. The centers are seeking 2,000 plus acres of farmland in Northern Virginia for new centers. Many Northern Virginia citizens are demonstrating against the destruction of cherished land. Neighbors are at odds with each other. Some sell out to the data centers and others refuse. The sample of the bitter atmosphere down there, complete with lawsuits, have a look at the news story, or many of the stories that are also available on the internet about that. I've left in here, which in this manuscript, which I'll give you later, I've got a link to one of the more sadder situations. Reuters reported last week that Amazon plans to invest $35 billion in Virginia by 2040 to add to the same amount, $35 billion that's already invested in Virginia. Billion-dollar companies such as Amazon, Walmart, and Google command that kind of money. It means that they can alter landscapes, build up communities, and sway town governments, suit their ever-expanding needs. Engineers can make data centers quieter, although I'm just hearing how difficult that is, quieter and cleaner, but they're not yet able to reduce the need for ever more space by data centers. I call data center sprawl the #1 threat to communities, in my opinion. There are other threats, of course, too. The troubles of Northern Virginia could become ours. If you doubt that, take a look at the 6 communities in this area that have been approached aggressively by data center salespeople. Griswold, Wallingford, Norwich, Montville, Osra, of course, Groton. That's what I see as strong demand. When Godspace and Tom Quinn first hit Groton, they were seeking a total of 380 acres on both sides of I-95. In view of the threat to our community, we ought to ask ourselves if our zoning defense will suffice. My question is whether our limit of 12,500 square feet per center, plus 100 plus 1,000 square feet per accessory is too high. What I can determine, the generally accepted threshold for hyperscale data centers is 10,000 square feet. Above that, there's a leap in complexity and growth potential that can mutate into the big leagues by just adding a zero at the end. I, as an amateur, can read that on the internet, I think. The reason for the 12,500 square feet appears simple. I've heard that there's a single in-house data center in a Groton company that has an inside 11,737 square foot data center. It is currently leased to the state of Connecticut. It is this fact, I'm told, that evolved into the 12,500 foot figure.
Recording in progress.
Would we not just make an easily justified grandfather exception? Some noise coming from me.
That was me.
Oh,
Sorry.
okay. Sorry. Okay, it's a fact. Yeah, there is this 11,700 square
I'm
foot
gonna mute you.
data center inside of a building in
No, you can't.
Groton, and that led to the 12,500 figure, I believe. Could we not just make an easily justified grandfather exception for this oddity to keep the town from wandering into the hyperscale zone, where our small municipality could one day be dwarfed and pushed around by giants? My thought is this: reduce the maximum allowed space to less than 10,000 square feet from 12,000 square feet. A couple of minor additions here. How will the new zoning language encourage or discourage the already approved data center host agreement on the north side of I-95? Two, can we exclude the east side of Flanders Road, which is a well-developed area below I-95, from being subject to these hyperscale rules? Thank you.
Okay. I'd like to move on to our next item of business, which is no business plan of conservation and development update. Some staff. Sorry, John, you wanna?
Yeah, we're all here to talk about this a little bit, to get a little bit more feedback from the commission. So, good evening, everyone. Thanks for having us tonight. As we're beginning the 2024 budget process, we are making a request to the council and the RTM for funding to update the POCD. State law requires that we update the POCD every 10 years. And by Connecticut law, we have to have it done by 2026. And as we're thinking about the preparation of that and how we want to move forward, obviously subject to us getting the funding, because if we get funding, we'll go in one direction. If we don't, a staff-led initiative will be much less and much less comprehensive. We're really thinking about a few items dealing with document format, issues to be addressed, public outreach and then kind of category of what we've missed. So again, as we're thinking about how we can start moving forward, preparing an RFP, the first thing we wanted to get some feedback from the commission on was just really document format. Our current POCD is quite, thick. It's got a lot to it. I believe there's 93 detailed recommendations, a lot of good information. But as we go through these, how much are we duplicating what was already said in the previous POCD? Do we want something that's of the same kind of thickness and volume, or do we want something that's a little bit more concise? A couple of recent POCDs that we found, both Hartford and Danbury, are some effective documents, a little bit more of a user-friendly document. So what are people thinking? We want to make sure we don't want to just arbitrarily limit things, but we also want to make sure it's a document people can go to.
So in front of you here, you can see that there are several past POCDs. And a lot of them are equally as thick, and they essentially took the same information and updated it. City of Hartford took a different tack, and that's the one that Hal's grabbing right now.
Danbury.
Thank you.
Right, and
Sorry.
then, yeah, and then there's also a New Britain one out here that's also, it's shorter, it's it gets to the point, it's a whole lot less wordy, and it works well in a digital format. So we're kind of interested in what your thoughts are on what type of format you'd like to see. I mean, we imagine that this is going to have to work digitally, it just is. But I mean, we don't, frankly, we don't read and use the giant text that often. We look at the future land use map, look at the recommendations, but most of them have, 20 or 30 pages about the history of Groton and that sort of thing. So we're just kind of interested in what your thoughts are.
Why don't we just go around the table and start with you, Hal, and see what people think.
I'm all for less is more. I'm interested in making it web friendly. That will enable that quite a bit, because instead of looking something up, then jumping to the next page and then jumping farther out, there'll be links.
Right.
So that in effect doesn't make me, I'm not afraid of the size or the thickness. It might still just be that thick. So I think making it web friendly will take care of quite a bit. You'll be able to just the nature of it will have hot links. And as soon as you're where you think you ought to be, it can take you those. So I think first and foremost, making it so that it shows up on a tablet or a computer best, and the printed version as the backup for us to sit here when it's easier to leaf through and leave stickies on. I'm all for just abbreviating the historical stuff and the beautiful pictures of things that were and smiling faces and that kind of thing. I don't think it has any place in this kind of document. I know it's supposed to make it more readable and understandable, but one page about the history, and I think people are done. If they want to come into the town and build something, they don't want to do that kind of research, nor do we. I don't think they need to. So we're telling them how to fulfill that. So I think that would cut it down considerably. Yeah, I need lots of diagrams. The diagrams that we have, I think, are great to just see at a glance what we're talking about. But illustrations, if they're not telling the reader some news they can use, then they serve no purpose. I think I'll pass it on from there if I come back.
What Hal just said. I think a lot of that stuff is a good read, but it probably could be just on the town website and be
Exactly.
probably even more accessible then, because people would, probably enjoy reading more there. But I would say concentrate on the task at hand, just for the most part.
So
Yeah, a couple things.
So turn your,
That'd be great.
Thanks. I did look at the Hartford one. It was interesting format. It seemed to be easier to use. I'd have to really spend some time with it to see if that's really true, but it seemed to be pretty well organized. Much more concise. It has interesting visuals, things. The one from Danbury, I think it was 217 pages, so I thought that was a little bit. See the difference right there, but I was hoping, I think there's a lot of good things we already have in our POCD, and I don't see why we need to replicate a lot of that. I know history was mentioned. I don't think it's so much the length of it, but this town actually has a lot of history. I remember, I don't know, 1 or 2 POCDs ago, the consultant was starting the history with the colonial time. I was like, wait a minute, we have a few other things going on here. And that was a huge positive addition. And now, given what's happened in the town since then, I would think that part of the history might even expand. So I wouldn't necessarily lock in history for what we have it, because we keep learning. I hope I keep learning. And I think the work that some of the Pequot research people have done, all latest report is really fascinating. So there's opportunities for education and everything else there. So, but I think, you know, that doesn't mean you need to change everything for sure. I think the process seems to have been pretty convoluted in the past. I know some more than others, but just a couple of things on that. I was thinking that one thing I think that would really help in the POCD is to have an update on the Camoin study. And it could even just be a quick type update. But it's like, I think that study, the data was 2019 or something, if I remember right.
So right now, we're actually just trying to stick to document format,
Right.
and we'll get
I'm
into
sorry.
some of
Okay.
the like issues to be addressed, public outreach. We're trying to dissect this into.
Sorry
just-
about that.
Sorry.
No, sorry, I'm glad. Thank you. Hold me back. I'll go on this. But yeah, so the document format, I agree. It should be, I guess, more intuitive in a way. It tends to end up repeating itself a lot, I think. Yeah, we all have our favorite maps in there, and they're probably the same. but, Yeah, so.
And, you know, I don't think we're necessarily looking to have less maps. I think the pictures go a long way, but, you know, as Deb said, what are the things that are really the most useful? The future land use map,
Sure.
the recommendations, those are the meat and the bones of the document, so.
And just one last thing on format. I think every one of them has had so many recommendations. It's kind of a nightmare to even know what's been recommended. And some of them tried to prioritize them, but I think you really need to skinny them down. Probably more than
I
anything.
get it.
You know, something that's try to
That's one
figure.
thing we liked in the Hartford one. I mean, it was 1 page, you know, if by 2035, we must do
Yeah, I
X,
just saw
Y, and
that,
Z.
yeah.
Right.
Yeah,
It actually gave hard.
right.
Kevin?
Yeah, sure. So thanks for bringing this item up, because it was actually a document that I utilized a lot as we got into some of the larger land use issues. And I found it valuable, and I found it similar to the comments here this evening, very repetitive. So I'm big, a big fan and supporter of process improvements, and that appears to be the approach as far as format is concerned. The 93 things just throw me, in big corporations or in learning, as you know, we need it down to similar to what Hartford did. And these are the 6 things that we need to, 5 things, whatever it may be, that number, but it's a small number, and bundle some of those recommendations, the 93 within that 6, as far as the format is concerned. And that's the first improvement. The second improvement is, I agree, after reading it, cover to cover, the historical was a little tedious, frankly, but it also brings the value of the community that we live in, the culture that has brought, Mystic and Noank and the town of Groton together, and it brings forth the soul of, you know, some of the challenges we face today as far as that history is concerned. So while I understand in the actual document, we want to, you know, provide a summation, a nice URL to what has already been accomplished, what is our history would be nice. And that's it.
Regarding the format, I think we ought to understand who uses this document, what it's used for. And in the things like the history are important, especially the history, maybe recent history, but we need the back history to back to the Indian days to know that that's a concern, and that we have to maintain some of that history. And we did the whole document. I think the last time we did it got too much put in the early parts of it. And we didn't put enough emphasis on the end part. Where do we want to go from here? And some of it, I think, was due to the consultant that we had. What's the problem?
I don't know. Kevin, can you still hear us? We still good?
Yes, so good.
Okay, we just had some kind of message about changing speakers. Thank you.
Nope.
Oh, you're
Perfect.
We're good. We're good.
You mean its own thing, or?
Yeah, it was a Zoom thing. We're
No,
good.
I mean, it picks up a speaker because it wants to.
I don't know why it does what it does. I'm being honest.
But I think we sort of got caught in spending a lot of time, and then the consultant wasn't the best writer. And he was paid by the hour, so he puts in more words. Maybe, I don't know. Well, we can certainly streamline it, but maybe you got to have a good outline to begin with. What do you want to do with it? What's the purpose of the document? Which to me is really, what do we want to, where do we want to go? And guide, not us, but it's the people coming into the town that maybe want to develop something, or people, residents that are here that want to develop things. Because we do want development, we're going to have it, whether we like it or not, changes. And it's also the unknown things that come up that we don't know about today. We've got to address those things like this. All the property and schools that we don't know what to do with, or maybe we want to go back to regional schools again. Rather than having local schools, rather than one school covers the whole town. No, I tend to agree that we don't want a lot of pictures in the thing. They maybe add a little bit, but people want to read it to know what do they want to know. So what's the information that we need to transmit? Oh, go ahead.
It's a surprise, but in terms of the part of where we want to go from here and good ideas at the end, just, I don't know if this is a format thing or a substance thing, but I'll throw it out there. Something that looks like the campus master plan, but it's the town master plan that looks like it. It's purely diagrammatic and big sketchy and big fat pen and arrows. I think we need one of those. I wouldn't have thought so, except that I happen to sit on the town-owned property reuse committee. And there's 3 counselors on that. And one thing that came up was say, well, we don't have a master plan. And I said, we actually do. This is it. You don't need to, you just refer back to this. That's the master plan. But they didn't know. I had to explain that this is how we got there, because it doesn't look like a master plan. It doesn't have a big thing. So this is the town center. This is how we feed people into it, and the kind of things that you would do in a diagrammatic way. And everything else is based on that. I don't know if that's the core of it or if that's the last part of it, but something should feed into that.
Well, I think that actually plays a lot into the format, because a document like this, people get lost.
Yeah.
Whereas a document like that Hartford one, and if we took out all the pictures of smiling faces, as a couple of people said, we'd really get into the meat and potatoes, because, you know, every POCD or, you know, master plan I've ever worked on in a community, we spend so much time on the history, oh, well, where were we? How did we get to where we are? That we don't spend the time. It's, oh, we got to hurry this thing up, or else we're not going to meet the state deadline. And we don't get to the most important piece, which is to focus on where do we want to go from here. And I think that's what that Hartford plan really does. We're not just going to toss this document away. It's always going to live out on the web. And this has a lot of great history. Maybe there's a little bit of, instead of going back, and again, you know, when we think about some of the issues in the format, maybe we want to talk a little bit more about some of the recent history of what's happened since the last update, and then where do we want to go from here? And if I think if we focused on that, so the next thing we can start talking about is some of the issues, I think that would also help us with the format. So I think we have some good format feedback. So, you know, next we wanted to get a little bit into the issue. So to kind of give a high level view on some of the issues that, you know, we want to be looking at, you know, because the POCD does do a lot of good guidance for us on what are the next sets of regulations that we need to update, if we need to update them. I mean, we just went completely through, you know, the zoning regulations, and as time goes on and special instances come up like we're working on now, we can react to things. But whether it was the new mixed use zoning, successful grant applications that reflect, you know, what we're thinking about for true, you know, open space and recreation planning, Mystic parking management, just identifying those as issues, construction of new schools, as well as, you know, so what new issues have really come up from 2016. Housing and affordable housing have really come out more in the last couple of years. The town developed an affordable housing plan, impacts of climate change on town operations and infrastructure. We did, you know, weave that into this current plan, but I think we'll end up doing a lot more in the next rendition, but also in, you know, the other large issue of what is the plan? Because last time we didn't get to, what are we thinking about those excess properties? Oh, no, we'll do a special study on that. And that's kind of what happened the last time. And all right, that probably should have been, looking back in retrospect, that's one of the biggest issues that we need to figure out as a community. What does the community want to see happen in these areas that have water and sewer, that might have this great infrastructure, and there's an asset there? So those are some of the things we're thinking about as issues. Would love to hear if there's some other big picture issues that the commission is thinking about, you know. And again, this is so we can start developing some type of an outline. So when we start thinking about outreach, even before we put an RFP out there and then the RFP, what are some of the highlighted issues that we need to address?
We'll talk on that before I commission, by the way.
Yeah.
Several years ago, we used to go over some of the action items. I don't think we've ever done that with this current POCD. Never talked about them. Probably because there are too many. It's too hard. It's not realistic. So we may want to have high level, and maybe you have the details below that, or what are the few main issues that you want to accomplish?
It wasn't on our to-do list. It wasn't on our to-do list. I mean, it almost seems like if we were supposed to do it,
Well,
then one of the items in our agenda.
as a
should be-
planning commission, it was supposed to be something that we review periodically,
Right.
once in a while.
Yeah.
And take a look, do we want to have an interim 5-year update?
Right.
Never did that. I think it just got too hard.
Well, this
Or
is
two
really
towns.
interesting here, how they did it. I mean, I'm just looking at this for the first time, but it just says walking. And then it says by 2035, we must, and then this list of things. I think that's great. And that's what, you know, you could have a we must, we should,
Mhm.
you know, we'd like to, whatever it is, but you know, and that's prioritizing the needs, but this to me, I look at this really quickly and it's just,
And you
it's
know
like
what needs to
so
be done,
easy
right?
to understand where we're going. That's, I think,
Well,
directly what,
It's where, what's the most important?
yeah,
Important items, like transportation.
yeah.
We just forget that it's all about you drive yourself. That may not be realistic in the long run. And maybe
Yeah,
Mystic's parking problem is a good thing because you can't drive there. And you gotta walk. And you see a lot of people walking now. I think partially from the pandemic, but I think that's good to have that actually. Where you have a walking community. But
So any big issues that?
I have a whole
Seriously,
list.
yeah.
I mean, I'll just, if you want, I mean, so I wrote kind of the new Coast Guard Museum, what does that mean for
Groton. And I'm looking at transportation and I know the new pier. How we move people through the region and not just think about Groton. I
don't know, it's got
identifying places that we might expand to with boats or different ways of moving people around rather than just cars. And so then we talked about complete streets, what that means. Alternative transportation needs, walking, bicycling. I think that we should be talking to the sub base and to the big employers and finding out, what they need. I wrote here, obviously the easy ones are the Mystic Oral School, because we, had that debacle and now we need to figure out just, that the downtown, they're talking about trains coming in, I don't know. Maybe we need to think about Shoreline East, shuttles, something, I don't know. I was just sitting at dinner brains about this stuff, but Esker Point, resiliency, because we're gonna have to back up, I think, either that or fortify our shoreline. And what are we thinking in the next 10 years? Where are we going? Are we gonna retreat or are we gonna, build that up? And I think that, because what you don't want to do is be doing two things that are working against each other. So you don't want to be developing an area and at the same time thinking that you're going to be retreating from it too. It should at least be thinking about that stuff. I think that's all of them.
Well, things like cycling population or workforce here. We really rely on a couple of major employers, but one of them has a very cyclic business. And I don't think we want to say if it goes up to their employment goes up to where it was in the days of the Polaris program of 20,000 people working at Groton. And then it goes back down to 7,000 or 8,000, or maybe even less than that. We're going to see that again. Now. So that's something that the history sort of is important to understand, that and our location and the relationship between New York and Boston. We're in midway, which means it's very difficult probably to attract much new business here. And certainly you don't see any businesses that employ a lot of people anywhere in this country. I just think you're going to have small businesses.
No, actually,
Medium size.
you have Facebook and you've got those things that employ insane amounts of people who are being dragged back into the office. And as some of their center places are becoming more and more unlivable, there's opportunity, if we have enough connectivity, to have satellite communities that are enormous with one or two employers.
Mhm.
So there is that opportunity.
No, but I just said
Data
what
center
we have.
kind of wraps into that.
I think what we have here is the waterfront is what's
Yeah.
one thing that's unusual.
That's great.
No, that's important, I think, is to identify our
And
strengths.
that's our strength, or why you can draw people here either to live or to be employed here.
And being equidistant
And-
from
No,
the two sides.
Oh, it's-
work in Boston.
And if you have good transportation system. Which is, I think, needed.
Kevin has his hand up. So-
Oh,
I was just listening as always, but one of the issues that I see, and my professional life, I work with a lot of frameworks, and that's why I love planning and zoning, because there's a framework. There's mostly black and white, right? And you need to tie together what the neighborhoods or whatever. But maybe what we choose to design, and it's a little more complex. For instance, if you look at the POCD and you look at the climate and resilient work that we've done, and you put that with planning and zoning, some of the things that have been our big challenges lately, they don't make sense. They don't make sense in relation to the other plans that we have in the town of Groton. And so to me, they look like silos. POCD, because it has 93 things that we must do, that's a silo because we can't really accomplish that. But if somehow we take those 6 assets out of POCD and we tie them into what we believe as a community should be the climate and resiliency work that we've done, and tie that into planning and zoning, we've got a pretty tight town of where we want to go to. It's difficult to do, but it's a framework much more than some really good studies and a separate POCD that we've done. So those are my thoughts.
second input.
Well, I have
A few things, yeah.
We start
Sorry.
off.
One thing, I guess I'd like to, there was something that was kind of interesting saying what towns have problems with affordable housing and which ones don't. It was like all the big towns don't have a problem, but the smaller ones do. And I'd like to really understand that better as far as Groton is concerned, because well, I know some time ago, it was always that, oh, our problem is we have way too much affordable housing, but it's really, we have a different mix here, I think, of housing too, and certainly some real silos in housing. But I'm kind of, and it kind of goes on, what does the community really need? I guess I'd like some better information on that. Because in our affordable housing too, we should also have opportunities to really improve some of these areas, as we've talked about before we were redoing the zoning regs and everything. But this leads me to one thing I think would be really helpful. And that is going back to my Camoin study comment. If I remember right, it was as of 2019, and we all know a lot of things have popped up in town, apartment complexes and different things. And it'd be nice to have an update on, okay, that says 5,000, but where are we now? And I think it's important, and maybe I say this because I used to be I used to commute into Westport, Connecticut when I first moved here, so I know what commuting's about, and I think that is an absurd commute, but I do think people will commute like to Rhode Island. That was a gift, 40 minutes or even an hour. But what does it look like in our bigger commutable area as to how has the housing changed in that, and maybe that goes at least Old Saybrook's like 20 minutes away, you can go quite a distance, and people do sometimes like to live somewhere else in Groton and yet work here. I think that's another fact of life that sometimes is downplayed, but but it'd be good to have, I think, an update on where is this area as far as having enough housing and what kinds of housing. And I think other big items people have talked about, I certainly agree with climate change and resiliency, because we do have a wonderful waterfront all over the place, but because of that, we have that problem of what's happening as we speak. And then, of course, the other thing that seems to be gaining traction in the state is to improve the possibly to really change housing in some areas also. What's better than that, but not have to use a car. So, but that would be, I think it would be bigger picture type things that we should have in our plan. That's all I have. Not really, but that's all I have.
The next topic area that we wanted to talk a little bit about was public outreach and kind of in the past, we've, sent out some surveys, had something up on our webpage, although we've gotten a lot better at how we collect that type of data with our Greater Groton webpage, as well as just through social media. And we'd send things out to select agencies and locations. We'd have our public hearing and we'd have a steering committee. And in the past, the steering committee was usually made up of just members of town boards and commissions. And I think the last POCD that we had done, it was started before I started working here, but I think the steering committee kind of went in one direction. And when their draft came to the commission, I think the commission wanted something that was a little bit of a different direction. So I think it's important that, at the end of the day, it is the commission, that adopts this plan. But we want to make sure that we have good representation from members of the town. And, as we think more about equity and inclusion, we have a very diverse population in town. I think it's somewhere around 30%, 31% of our population are minorities. And we don't see that representation showing up in most of our meetings and inputting on a lot of our plans. So we want to do more outreach to select neighborhoods, areas in town to try to get feedback from a much broader audience than we have in the past. And along the same lines, if we have some type of a steering committee, do we try to put one together that's more made up of folks from around town that may or may not be involved in things right now? So looking to get a little feedback from you on that.
I don't think we ever had a steering.
Oh, yeah, every single time.
Really? I don't know.
Yep, I've been here for 3, every single time there's a steering. There was a representative from wetlands, one from zoning, one from the historic.
What did they do?
They sat and got presentations from the consultant, provided a little bit of feedback, and then the consultant would take that away and start writing.
What would he write?
Start writing the POCD.
Oh,
Right, and so that was sort of the extent of the public outreach.
Yeah, we had meetings, the last time there were some meetings that were held here in this building.
Mhm.
With open to the public and just still ask them for
Right.
any input they.
Right,
Unconstrained.
right, and we're finding that, making people come here sometimes is a barrier.
Oh,
So,
I'm
so,
not saying-
no, I know, but I think that's why we want to, talk about, public input and really, sort of target neighborhoods and do neighborhood meetings. And hopefully on do it before we set up a steering committee. And maybe get, some interested people from those neighborhoods who want to be on the steering committee
Well-
rather than land use commissioners.
Do we want a steering committee?
Well, that's it too. Do you want a steering committee? Right?
Hey, it's sort of a.
Yep.
Duplicate effort unless we wanted to say the other commissions should give us their input on what they want. to accomplish.
Other people are almost impossible to reach. Because if you've got transportation problems that
Absolutely.
you're trying to correct, then that's why they can't come to the
Right.
meeting.
And those are the voices that we need.
Yeah,
Those are really the
Yeah,
ones that
that's
are,
what you-
that we
yes, so.
hear from, that'll make a much stronger POCD in the future, because we're actually representing the entire community.
and how do you make people understand that this is important to them? How do you get them to buy
Right.
into it? I'm not suggesting that I know the answer to that.
Right.
And maybe having meetings that aren't just in the evening, maybe even in the
Absolutely.
morning.
Yep.
For people who work
Yep.
different hours or have daycare,
Exactly.
kind of a.
For
thing.
food
So
or something that you.
Pizza,
Yeah.
bring people in.
So we recently did a public outreach meeting looking at the future use of the Claude Chester property. And we had daycare, we had dinner, we got the word out. And we had about
And we went door to door with
Yeah.
flyers so that the people in the neighborhood knew what was going on.
And I think we had around 50
No,
people
you
show
got a
up.
good.
And it was,
Yeah.
relatively close. It was, at Thrive 55. So it was near where it was actually being impacted. Same with, we recently had a meeting on resiliency and Mystic on the project that we're working on. I think we had around 50 people attend, knocking on doors, throughout Mystic, handing out flyers. So I think, things like that, targeting it a little bit more. Unfortunately, I think the best public input that we got from a large amount of people the last time we did this P O C D was when the folks in Old Mystic thought that we were going to change their zoning, and we had identified it as, you know, one of those, you know,
Special focus area, yeah.
focus areas. And
Yeah, yeah.
okay, got you loud and clear. We won't change it. We won't change anything. But through the entire process for years, we kept talking about it and heard nothing. We got to get out there. We need to do so, you know, focusing on that. Because if we get some of these things, major items wrong or miss major items, that's a big deal. As a, you know, so where do we want to put our time, our money, our focus? You know, I think it really goes into the public outreach. It goes into where do we want to go from here? What are the things that, how do we want to deal with growth and development? Where does it belong? Getting to that future, you know, master plan map that you were talking about with arrows. I think the more we can have community conversations about those and getting some understanding, that's going to help direct a whole lot of things.
One thing I heard a comment about, Colchester was a really good one for multiple things, but one being what took so long to get to that, but the other one was there were about 50 people there, and what was an issue that was raised was at least 25 of them were people who weren't necessarily from the communities you're trying to get to. They were us, and they were councilmen, and they were commissioners, and they were that kind of thing, who are supposed to be representative, but we aren't necessarily. So, yeah, we said there's about 50 people there, and we got the opinions of about 20 people that we wouldn't have normally.
Yeah.
So the payback isn't great. I don't know how good it needs to be, but we're looking for just some representation, not necessarily a crowd of people from the south end of the peninsula saying, okay, I need 100 people from the peninsula.
Yeah.
Probably need 3. They'll all have the same problems. So I don't know if it needs a steering committee as much as make sure we've invited found people who we can invite, who could make it. So long as they live in that location, you don't need big investment. You don't need to sit on this side of the table, but as long as we can grab hold of some people, bring them out.
I think too, if like follow up on that, if you concentrate on neighborhoods and just sit and think about it, you would recognize the names of the people who are the you know, the point person in Noank, in Pequannock Bridge, you know, the whatever it is, certainly up around Fieldcrest, you can identify names of people. Just break it up into the nodes of the town and try to, you know, make sure that those voices are heard, and that neighborhood associations, I don't know what, I mean, anything like that.
Almost the RTM, you know, the RTM has a neighborhood approach too. I don't know if that would work or if that's too many or whatever. I think you need to give people a chance. You know, you may know who the person that usually talks is from an area, but make sure everybody knows about it. I think it's a great idea to go to neighborhoods, because surveys have such a tendency to not even get enough people to signature.
Yeah, no, and it's the same people do surveys,
Exactly.
it's not me.
When you get these cliques, you can get, especially, you know, with technology, you can bulk up a survey if you wanted to pretty easily.
I think the survey for the 2016 one, majority of people were actually high school students, because the former planning director made a concerted effort to go over and talk to some of the social studies classes and urge them to take it. And so most of the respondents were.
Well, that's an important demographic.
It was, but not sure you want to make decisions.
No, I get it.
Yeah.
How many people will even pay attention to this problem, thinking ahead where the community wants to go? Probably very few. So I don't know if you can really get a lot of information.
I think it's a matter of what kind of questions you ask. I mean,
Yes.
it's probably not going to be, you know, where do you see your community in 10 years?
No.
But what do you need now? You know, what are the problems, and maybe list out some.
Cheap eggs.
Right? I mean, yeah, my basement floods all the time. I
Yeah.
need
No, that's a.
It could turn into a gripe session, which is okay.
Yeah.
This is.
No, it isn't.
actually a gripe session and say, okay, we'll take it from here. just let us know what the problems are.
But drainage can be a big problem.
yeah.
Because we get problems with with new
You know, or
development.
if you go back to that, the school thing, because I think that that's an important group of
Yeah.
people, is how, what can we do? You know, envision a town that you want to live in as a young person 20 years from now, and how can we keep people who are living in Groton now wanting to live here for the rest of their lives? You know, what is it that you are looking for as a young person? That kind of, you know,
Right.
and maybe even in the beginning of whatever this survey is, this is, you know,
That's a simpler one. In fact, the question
Well-
will not be 20 years because 17-year-olds have no idea.
20 years is old.
So,
But we could ask them, what would, after college, what would get you to come back here?
maybe if my parents are around.
The high school students may not be such a bad idea because they probably are influenced by their parents. And if their parents have problems or concerns, the kids probably recognize that. So they
Yeah.
probably be a good, accurate source.
And getting broad,
Yeah.
right? One place.
If I could offer one other thing specific to John's comments. So there's two things. I mean, I love to listen to young people, but the other side is some of the backbone of our community, you know, is not young. And I think it's equally valuable to listen to someone who's 55 or 60 and you say, what's going to allow you to remain in this community for the next 20, 25 years? Now, death will be a great equalizer, but the fact is that is very important as far as, you know, what those people say. So if I were to offer a suggestion to what John said, do we need another steering committee? We don't need another steering committee of the people, in my opinion, that we interface with today. I'd love to have some sort of outreach, you know, community. I mean, I'm always energized by when I go to, or I listen, because I don't always can go to them, but to the town council when 300 people show up. I'm energized by the people even this evening who show up and they give us a level of expertise, right? So the ability to reach people on a topic like this is very important. Maybe instead of a steering committee, we have an outreach committee, people who will know social media, people who will walk the streets and knock on the doors, you know, that basically say, and I'm not a politician, but I really love to hear, you know, around Claude Chester, what you'd really like to do. This is your neighborhood more than my neighborhood. It's my town with you, but what is in your neighborhood? So maybe that's the type of thing, you know, we change again, a process, and that process is, let's go out and talk to people. And so that's my thought.
It's a good idea.
Is that a lot of, that's a lot of work.
It is a lot of work.
It is.
but
It's a lot of work.
If we're putting our time and effort into that and not rewriting a voluminous plan 17 times, and you know,
Right.
that we can spend our money on outreach and a focused plan that really gets to the meat of what are the core issues. Because are we going to solve, well, should this road be 2 lanes or 3? No, that's some special study. But if we're talking about, yes, we want to address complete streets, there's a group working on that. Okay, that as long as from the POCD, what are the goals? What are the things we want to work on? And I think there's a lot of different ways that we can do some of that targeted outreach. And it is very important. And I think more and more communities are seeing that. At the last regional planning conference that we've gone to, I think it was Newton, Massachusetts, had done their normal outreach on something. And they said, all right, we're just kind of getting the same answers we've always heard towing the line. Then they started doing some really targeted outreach to different populations around the community. And they were hearing an entirely different story of what the needs were. So, you know, and it's not just young people or old people, it's every slice of the population, you know, age, race, gender, you name it. And that's what we need to focus on, not just I think we want to get the high school people, we want to get the 55 people, the 75 people, the 35s, the 20, you know, we want to make sure we're getting a really nice slice of all of Groton, just to hear what they're looking for. So
I would suggest, you said it exactly right, to find out what their needs are. Because if you ask people, they'll tend not to tell you what their needs are, they'll tell you what they want.
yeah,
Somebody else was arguing the other day that they really wanted to have housing down there in the Colchester area. We said, well, it's a floodplain. Maybe it's not the best place, but housing. Yeah, but that's what I want. Well, okay, we're the town and we need to give you what you need, not, which might not be what you want. So that's why I kind of like the gripe session. Just give me problems. And if you have some solutions, fine, but only an answer to a problem. Some of the, like the thing for Colchester, okay, you put your sticky on what, how many times you want, whatever it is you want. Well, and it's just a want list and not what we need. Do we need to have it there? No, we need a swimming pool. Does it need to be there? No, I just need a swimming pool. It's a different thing. So I like the need better than asking people what they want.
You want to move on, Jonathan?
Yeah, and then, yeah, just the last piece of that puzzle was, is there anything else you'd like to see? I mean, I think we kind of covered that, but.
I think one thing that's come up is, instead of the steering committee idea, is there's times when we want to work closer with certain commissions or other groups, like the Conservation Commission, for example. I know they were working on a future land type thing, the 30 by 30 plan. I don't know what the status of that is, but I think there's times when it'd be really good to, you know, cooperatively look at things with various expert groups. And we have such a nice variety of this.
I don't know, like, it seems like you have to have some steering initially, right? You don't want to just initiate this thing and hit the ground. It would be nice, I think, if it was some like maybe just really abbreviated or just something so that
Right.
we know.
I mean, the statutes have some things that you absolutely have to address in this thing. You know, so maybe we start with that and then figure out a path forward. So I think this discussion is really going to help us, if we get funded, you know, write a request for proposals, because we're going to have a better idea of what direction we want to go. And it's good if we can let people know you're going to be spending a lot more money on outreach than you are just having junior planner number 2 write the document.
You know what, I think that if we had done that kind of stuff, it would have made an easier process the last time.
Yeah.
And you don't waste a lot of time and money spinning wheels.
Yeah.
Yep, but also like Hartford doing that type of a plan, that's cutting edge in New England. They had to really push and work with the state of this really meets the intent of what a POCD is. So that was kind of turning the whole POCD model on its head. They blazed the path for us. Okay, now it's easier to do something that is more focused on where do we want to go, as opposed to, you know, where have we been in the last.
No, that's what that is to me. When I look at that quickly, it's a map.
Yeah.
All purposes, you know, where do we want to
Yeah, and
go?
that's what I think what Jeff said is spot on. It's, you know.
Because we have this as a history document.
Yeah.
The next one can be where do we want
But
to
it should be the history that would help us determine where we want to go. So if somebody picks it up, knows nothing about Groton, just understand why we want to go somewhere.
Yeah, and what we what's important to us, you know, and identify, I think identify our strengths and why people want to live here.
Yeah. Was there a different group, John, that wrote that Hartford or Danbury study that had not done that before? Or was it just the approach of the town that had the innovation within it to say, we're going to do this differently?
Now, with the Hartford one, I think that the former chair of their planning commission had a relationship with a California firm, and it's a really, really well-known planning firm.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, off the top of my head, I don't remember what the budget was for that, but I'm sure it was probably 4 times what we're looking at.
Yeah, I was just gonna ask, can we afford that?
So,
But you don't waste your time doing all the other stuff if you get down what the town really needs and wants, whatever it may be, right? And that's my belief, right? But I know it's probably very costly.
That's right.
Right.
That's right. We're not Hartford.
Or
So then,
1/4 of that.
yeah, and if that's what the commission wants, then sometimes I might have to be the bad guy and check you a little bit if we start going down some rabbit holes of and just remind you of
That guy's a
we're
Hartford,
focusing on
and that's why he did.
where do we want to go?
Yeah.
And if we start spending a lot of time and then resources on, starting to develop something like this. We'll just have to kind of, hey, wait, is this what we want or is that what we want? So just as we go through this process, we all need to be true to what is the goal. So we'll do the best we can. We can't force you to do anything, but
Well, the goal is really to have a map,
yes,
right? That's the goal, not what goes into it. What goes into it, we should have justification elsewhere in the
Mhm.
document that says that's why we want.
but the process, how we get to the development of that map is the most important piece. That you make
That's-
sure we have good community input on that.
That's the problem. Yeah, you want to make sure
Yeah.
it's thorough and it's the right one.
Because, most communities have very little input
But I-
on POCDs from the public because most people don't get one, it's an intimidating document for the majority of the population to read, except for people like us that love this stuff. Or it's, they don't see the connection of this to their daily lives.
People don't even, I mean, like what house, I was at that meeting, people don't even know that it exists or that what its purpose is. you know?
But I think on the last one, we started emphasizing the nodes in the town. And starting to see the fruit of that now, I think. it's
Absolutely.
chronic,
Yeah.
Exactly.
Which
Yeah,
it's good to see.
Yep.
It builds up.
Yeah.
And I think that's where Groton's strength is. You have these small nodes of neighborhoods. that are there, and it's not just one big urban sprawl. Which I don't think is nothing without.
Great.
All right, thanks.
Thank you. This was good.
So you think you've got?
Yeah, oh, yeah.
Information.
Now we just need to get the money.
I think no matter what you want, you'd either need to hire somebody
Right,
or
right,
gotta have the extra funding.
exactly.
Yeah.
It's a
Exactly.
burden on the
Right,
everyday running
Right.
staffs.
That's
Have
right.
to have.
that's right.
And if we use, I mean, I don't know what this, but if we use that as a model,
Yeah, it gives us.
it's not like that's the
direction.
only
Right,
company that can do that.
right,
work,
exactly,
Well,
exactly,
Once you see that. you
Yeah.
probably do it.
right.
Yeah, as a format or
Yep.
whatever it is that.
Except it's not gonna be that big. It's gonna be 8.5 by 11.
No, 11.
Fits on the screen.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah,
It's all in power. Put it all in power.
yeah.
Okay. So moving on then, no applications. Do we have any?
We don't know.
No referrals, reported chair. We had a regional planning commission meeting last month, quarterly meeting. No quorum, all the officers are there for life. Actually, one person was Mike Cherry from Ledyard. I don't know how many years. he
Oh,
was
yeah,
there.
Cherry.
And he couldn't get out of the job because there was never a quorum. So then we had one a couple of years ago, we did have some new officers. We spent a little bit of time going around with different communities on what their activities are, which is sort of interesting to listen to. So sounds like New London is finally starting to get interest in selling part of the Fort Trumbull property
yeah.
and building housing. They're pretty active in that, and that sounds like they're making good headway there. But the affordable housing issue came up by some of the rural communities are really concerned with that because they really can't meet those standards. Because they don't have sewage, public sewage or public water. And it's a real hardship for them to meet the standards. Because the standards, you can't apply them all over the place. I guess the COG is working on a couple of things, new plans that they have for big one is an open space. They're looking at developing a plan for stormwater drain system funding. And looking at the metropolitan transportation plan. or some of the activities they said there again. And you're gonna talk about training.
I can. Yep,
Okay,
yep,
well, later on.
when we get there.
we'll get there. All right. Does anybody on the commission have anything to report on?
Yes.
Oh, yes.
Yeah. Let me get the two little quick items. That's a question for you, for staff, is our empowerment to control signs. I just mentioned that because I said I just sat in or watched a historic commission, and somebody was proposing, I don't know if you saw that, an enormous Pearl Street sign. They said not particularly, but maybe they were very supportive of the idea going forward, but the only proposal seemed to go directly to the historic commission, or they were suggesting a 5-foot by 3-foot sign for Pearl Street restaurants, shops, and parking. You're right, there's 2 shops, 1 bar and parking lot, and they wanted a 5-foot sign. So they let them know that 5 foot probably wouldn't fly, but you could work on it. And they were just going to go off the side and still come back with yet another proposal. Does that come back to?
It gets a zoning permit, it gets a zoning review and a zoning permit.
So
Okay.
it has rules.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right, it
Yeah,
has
yeah.
signs, but then
Yeah, yeah.
we don't do content at all. So what we would have to come back, because any sign we put in downtown Mystic, you want all the signs in downtown Mystic to be the same sign. So I
Yep,
just wanted to make
yep,
sure that
yep.
this went through the same, because it didn't come out in that meeting.
Hmm.
And it seems like it should have, that said that, yet you're probably in the wrong place right now. We wanted to start someplace, that's fine, start with.
And it's
start with-
free, so yeah.
Right, so, but they designed it, I felt bad about. The other one was a training that they were going to have, which is 21 March for SHPO training. Can anybody else take that too? Do you know about that? Just take-
Yeah, I mean, yeah,
Pretty valuable for
Yeah.
Training.
state
Yeah.
historic preservation.
Oh,
And that's probably, all their
Yeah.
meetings are zoomed, so if anybody wants to
Yeah,
attend
yeah,
that, go.
absolutely.
Absolutely.
We'll let- we'll let you know.
Lapse us very nicely. So,
Yeah.
okay, so what, like the information on that?
Yep.
I'll keep you in this. So the meat of what I have here is that had on the town-owned property reuse committee. One of the things that they're coming up with is a process for evaluating property that the town wants to get rid of, use in some way. It's also a process for evaluating, as it turns out, proposals coming from developers for property that should come out of the blue. And then a process for evaluating and coming up with RFPs. What we've got is, we know how to do each one of these things, but there's no process in place. So the idea was to come up with a process. Part of that process is to establish this kind of cross-cultural board that would meet quarterly at least, just to evaluate, just if there's nothing else to do, then just take on a couple of properties and see what would be good for them. It made perfect sense. It's someone from housing authority, economic, conservation, planning, zoning. It also kind of empowers us a little bit to come up with an early scheme, which I'm not really comfortable with. So I'm asking is that where we want to be in that process, because what's supposed to happen is that quarterly, at least quarterly, this group will meet and say, look at one of the school properties, or there's a whole lot of actually very small properties that we wouldn't even think of. They're just vacant properties. And we come up with a bunch of pros and cons of a good plan forward for that property, and we go to the town council. Question is, before whoever of us is on that board speaks up too loudly, should first come here, sort of as part of the process, so that initially what it's talking about, that person would be liaison with their own commission, as opposed to being the person on that committee. I personally like the idea of that cross between being liaison, saying, okay, discuss it at the committee, and then then whoever it is would bring it to this group. There would be no project necessarily. So we just kind of nail down what we would approve and agree to it, because it's going to go forward.
we have to approve.
We would have, well, there's nothing to approve.
No, sometime we have to.
Oh, it's sometime in the future, but by that time, it might be kind of late in the process, and that's the problem. The whole idea of this is to pre-vet these things, so that by the time the town council starts making decisions, they have some idea as to how all the other commissions might rule,
Yeah.
given a certain set of circumstances. That all the other commissions have already weighed in a bit. And say this property would probably be good for this kind of store, this kind of housing, it's best for that kind of thing. It'll just issue a report. It can't make any decisions. And the report would include already decided, it'll include minority reports. So we say, hey, here's the best idea for this. But there was also some discussion that it might be okay for this thing too. And it'd be pros and cons of everything. So it's mostly a report that is a concise way for the town council to weigh which way they should go on this thing. And not come up with an oral school or data center surprise. That's the idea. So I'm looking for
No, that makes a lot of
input
sense.
on this is where you think this could be. I think the timing would be fine since we meet, twice a month. That's plenty of time to evaluate something, but it's not like a proposal would come forward. In some cases, the proposal would be, we just want to get rid of this piece of property. So we're not really evaluating anything except for what's the pros and cons. It become a discussion item for the group that we would then put forth something out, not a decision. Your input on this too. I'm not sure what's permissible, what the kind of thing.
So I think one of the trickiest things about this is no matter how you slice it, it's always going to be a chicken and egg.
Absolutely.
Because, all right, if I think the idea of bringing it back to the commission, getting input from the commission. Okay, well, where is your, I know you all have a lot of input, or a lot of knowledge about the community. But then if at that meeting, 10 people show up and express very loudly one concern.
Mhm.
But there was no other real big public outreach process that included the entire community.
Oh, that's actually part of this group is outreach too. So that's part of the idea. That's built into this other group.
Yep.
It wouldn't just be this.
Mhm.
Outreach should be a core thing. It would be the public knowledge that we're looking into it, actually looking at putting a sign on the property that will look like a liquor license sign.
Yeah.
It said, this thing's under evaluation and here's who you call, or here's what you look at. So we'll get input from the community directly to the group. It doesn't need to come here.
But there are two things that happen. One is the planning commission has to agree that the town can sell the property. They
Yeah.
don't say what it's used for. They means the town has no use
Right,
in the future.
correct.
That's one thing.
That's correct.
And the other is just, does that use meet the zoning regulation when somebody applies to build something?
Correct.
Normally that person.
Do with the council should be concerned with it. Do they want to sell the property for the town, or does the town have a use for it?
Well, invariably, but
Not but
the schools are the big ones, and there's a lot of other small ones, and they're zoned however they were zoned because what was there in 1935 has happened to be what there is leftover. So we have already said that we don't mind tweaking zoning a little bit.
You can't.
Well, we can't.
You can't. The ZBA can.
Okay, I don't understand that. When I say tweak, was that, would we be open for a zone change?
Well, but that's they really should talk with town staff, I would think, like they usually do. As to what are the possibilities.
That's part of this too.
Because you get in the situation here, you don't want to give the appearance you're promising more than you could be able
I
to.
don't promise anything, just.
Because you're moving along in time and things change. I think
Future land use map. That's what it all comes down
Yeah.
to, because as we're going through this process and we're thinking about each of these schools or these excess property, the big ones, there's 6 or 7 big ones. Whatever this future land use map says, well, that's what the zoning can be changed to. Now, can we go back and amend the POCD in the future to change the future land use map?
Mhm.
Oh, then the fix is in.
Mhm.
Oh, and that's the public perception when you start going to do that for a particular project. All right, adding more layers of complexity to say, well, all right, we know we want this on the property. Okay, great. We want a developer to build that. Let's put out an RFP and then we get 0 responses to it and we put it out. Okay. And one of the reasons that we did the RFP process initially the way we did was because we weren't getting any feedback. We weren't getting any input. And it's like, okay, let's see what the development community wants. And through that whole council process, what would have happened was, in some instances, someone who could bid on it, yep, the zoning is, so for Pleasant Valley, the zoning is multifamily. Great, okay, the proposals we all got for that, it meets the zoning. If a developer was chosen, their next step would have been, come see the commission and get through or don't get through the land use process. Other properties where the zoning doesn't jive. So actually a great example is Groton Heights. Before I started working for the town, there was a committee that looked at, there might have been two committees that looked at the future use of Groton Heights. And they had all these great ideas and nothing ever happened because there was no funding for a museum or this public and all these things. And the building is continuing to sit there and deteriorate. So sometimes it's what do you want for a property can be very different than what the need is and or what the money that will pay for it is too.
Absolutely.
So we spin around in circles thinking about these ideas. So I think a lot of it is going to come to what are the allowed uses or what is the community willing to have on that property? And I think the best way, and maybe this is how we get more people involved and interested in the POCD, is we say, hey, one of the major focuses we're going to do in the new POCD is to talk about the future uses of these 7 properties and what's the right thing for the community, knowing what our needs are, what's happening at EP, our housing, affordable housing, needs for open space and parks and rec land, transportation, trains, all of those things, making it a little bit more concise. And but maybe that's a great place to start for the future use of those.
Isn't that what you're doing now?
I think so. I think what it might be is that it becomes this like evaluation. It'd be great if in fact they just turn to you and say, what can they do? And then you come up with a list of things that they could do.
Yeah.
So the difference would be, we also have on the board, the housing authority, just said, yeah, but I really prefer having, that's the only place I can put housing, even though all these things are permitted, the best thing would be housing. And the conservation will say, yeah, except for this piece over here, because you don't want to do that. That would take a lot of meetings to get through. There's no board that's you sit around the table and do that.
Yeah.
And this establishes a group that will sit around the table and do that.
Hmm.
So most of the work does happen kind of automatically with people knowing the business in one table and knocks out the things of let's just go for it and do this thing. Where it goes further, if we're going to say, yes, does it look like that's going to be okay? That would be, it's almost like if Stonington's doing something, we put it in front of us here. We should already have an idea. They know this is going to affect us or not, and we'll throw it out to you. But it's more of a courtesy call, but to make sure that whoever's on the board and whoever's on the board from here has made the right call. That's when the rest of the commission would sit in before some other question comes up and says, hey, do you think of this thing? That's why we sit here. Here's the thing you didn't think of. It says it's permitted, but I don't agree that this is fulfilling it. So that's why I'm suggesting that maybe part of the process is that board meets. They have a ton of, they've already gone through a whole routine that they're trying to figure out for the community to weigh in. And it might be part of what's delivered here, saying, here's this piece of property. Here's all those comments that came from the community. We know we don't want to do X, Y, Z. We know we might want to do A, B, C. What do we think? And then it's yet another set of opinions is all it gets, because that's all that we're handing over to the town council. It looks like this is what it is. And rather than it just be, if you end up sitting there and you end up sitting on this thing, well, these two guys said it was okay. And the rest of us say, well, I wish you hadn't said that. That way, everybody can be on board. This will be repeated for the conservation and for housing authority. I don't think there's anybody questioning anything. And the economic commission, they're going to say the same thing. Sure, you can put any number of things there, but they really want to have a place for a couple more shops there or a business there, or whatever it is. We wouldn't pick up on that, and that round table will already have come up with that kind of thing.
And this process has to be approved by the council. So.
Is this our
so-
job, though? I don't
You
know.
know,
if it's Like this, I
I
mean,
think
this,
you've got some time.
I mean, that's what I'm just like, I mean,
Because I feel, the only thing I
I would
would
be afraid of is that as a group, if we made a recommendation like that, then we're sort of buying into something and then you're.
You are.
Yeah, but I mean, you're not voting on it, you're not committing to it.
Yeah, you
It
can't.
seems kind of,
It's, you have to wait on, you can't vote on it
But I-
unless we have enough.
We cannot vote.
but I also understand the
And
kind of,
that
you know,
might
where
change.
you're
Just coming up
stuck
with a report.
because.
But some people may change their minds.
Absolutely, but they should have a reason for changing their mind.
They don't have.
No,
to.
they.
Well, you really, when it comes
They've got a
down
reason
to
for
it,
changing their mind.
no, but you really don't have.
Could be, the reason could be that 1,000 people show up who
And that's a
hate
good
you.
reason. But that's a good reason. Then we got community input and everybody hated it. So, okay, that's something
Well,
that's a reason to change.
They could,
Not just, I rethought about it and I decided I don't like big house, you can't just think reconsider based on nothing. You better have, if you have to have a reason for reconsidering. So that's the way to kind of put it out there. Otherwise, we're kind of nowhere. Here it's right, it's chicken and egg. And what they're trying to do is at least get a little more egg before you start cooking.
it's really all on an ego.
It is.
It's
No
It's
chicken.
the chicken and egg.
But that's
It's
the
no
whole
chicken
process.
and egg.
Have some process and the idea of pre-vet it so that they're not way off track.
Well, they can always come and present something to us if they want.
We'll have to develop quite a bit to present to you.
Oh, no, I mean, if it's just an informal thing, they always,
Well, that's what this would be. This would be an informal thing presented here. It would be presented by whoever the liaison to that group is. And that's what we'll list as part of the process.
I like the idea of it getting into the P O C D at this point.
it's really, POCD should.
Feed into that.
And
Their land.
anything that happens with an excess piece of property, sale, or it has to come to you with an 824 anyway.
That's correct.
And that's,
So, yeah.
and all
That's
we care about is
Yeah.
it has no town use.
That's right. That's all
Don't
we
say
care
what
about.
we're doing with it.
And frankly, that's kind of late in the process because I'm telling you, the way this process is going together right now. It's actually late in the process. They'll say, okay, now we just need to make sure there's no other town use.
No, yeah, but that's what your group should be deciding what you can do with the property. Does the town want it? And if they don't, do they want, what can they go out and get somebody
That's what the purpose. of this
advertise?
is.
That's all it is, not what goes there. Unless it's the town wants to.
Well, that's part of it's going to be, if the town's going to be steering, if they put out an RFP, town's going to be steering what would go there.
And that's in the zoning regulation.
No surprise.
That's. It's there.
I think that's enough.
If you need a zoning change, then you'd have to have,
Well, zoning change is a different story.
that would be the only time you might want.
And it might be identified saying, what if we want to do this, then you need a zoning change. Then that would, how about that?
Then we'd
That
have to
would
act on it.
require a zoning change.
And then we have to have an application.
Okay, but usually that comes with a project. That's what have no project,
Well, then why would we want to not meet the zoning regulation?
because they want to do something. They want to put out an RFP, do more than what's already available.
No, allowed. It's.
That's
allowed.
what's not allowed right now.
So, and that's where you get into the conundrum of you serving as the zoning commission, looking purely at what's allowed versus thinking about the planning in the future. And if the group is looking for what the allowed uses are,
That's clear.
or what the future plan uses are, because I think too often we've looked at this document and the future land use map of, well, this is what's here today and that all works, so let's just keep it, as opposed to where do we want to go? What's the best future use for the town for this property? Or for this grouping of property? Because sometimes if you get too much into the minutia of only looking at each property so closely individually, each property will be its own microcosm of the entire community, and it'll get chopped up into so many pieces, it might not work. So if you ask my input, I think the best way to determine the future use of many of these properties is whether you did a larger community charrette or something like that on all of them, or ran it through our future POCD process to figure out for the ones that the zoning might not match up with, what a future use could be. That's where,
That's gotta be. in
Well,
there.
That's right.
But I mean, we did, that was a downtown Groton area, really, is we had it changed in the PLCD
Mhm.
and the zoning regulations have been
Yeah.
changed
That's right,
to support
that's right,
a new type of development.
that's right. And same with the Quantic Bridge area.
We have several places.
That's right,
It actually worked.
So,
that's right.
so that's the process really for
Yep.
changing this.
Yep.
and
Yep.
as we look to reduce the number of zoning districts we had, we, looked at all these properties and relied on the POCD. So if we think we want, as a community, a different type of use for Groton Heights, okay, or SB Butler, or whichever of these properties.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yes, but, and that's why I'm using that as an example, because we don't control it. But it's in the middle of a neighborhood with, a large building, that's a resource there.
Do we have to, I mean, are you suggesting that these properties should be identified in the new POCD?
Maybe, but,
then
and
do
and
that
maybe,
legwork?
and maybe it's not, identified parcel by parcel, but a
some-
process.
Mhm.
That, actually, that was a recommendation in here, is how are we dealing with these historic buildings or old buildings that do not meet the underlying zone? That clearly are not, the schools are just not gonna be schools anymore, but they're gonna be something else. And we need to come up with a way to make them something else that's palatable to the neighborhood.
But isn't that identified in the zoning regulations today?
Yeah, but it's not a
It's
good
not a-
regulation.
Oh,
Okay,
well, that's different.
right, and then the zoning
Oh, but-
commission just didn't have enough time to work on that particular one.
But there is something.
There is, yeah, there is.
So it's.
Or as part of the development of the POCD, you could say, you know what? As we're looking at this future land use map, we want
Yeah.
to do a deeper dive into these 7 critical properties.
Right, and say, okay, this one, it's a school, but we think it should be housing, or we think it should be multifamily housing, or we think it should be industrial. I don't know.
And
Yeah.
that's something you can get
Yeah.
into.
I would think, yeah, but it should be with the surrounding area.
Yeah, I'm just saying,
Has to be
example, right,
compatible
that's right.
With the surrounding area, so it's not unique to that piece of property.
Maybe,
If it's a school
maybe, but
building,
if you want to save a historic building,
That's
but,
different.
well, that's what I mean,
No, no,
yeah, yeah.
But that's already addressed, or maybe not correctly addressed, but it's in there.
It needs to be better addressed in the
Yeah,
POCD so that we can then, when we go to write the zoning for it, we have better.
we can say it's
But-
consistent.
But those things, but redeveloping that property, it has to be consistent with the neighborhood
Sure.
or compatible with
Sure.
them.
Compatible.
Sure,
Compatible.
sure, sure.
So, yeah.
But does that mean it just, the building comes down and it gets cut up and
Oh.
it's all single family homes? I don't know.
Oh,
I don't
then
know.
it's not,
Right,
and that's, different.
right.
It's
Right.
reuse of that building.
Or the land,
Use of it.
or the,
Just like that building that used to be that school that was before private residence on Quantic Road. That we just approved.
oh, right,
Oh, yeah.
yep, yep, Yep.
Yeah.
yep,
was-
right,
That was
right.
reuse of an
Right.
existing building.
Yep.
And they had different regulations for that than if it were
Yep.
brand new.
and that
So
was a
that's-
recommendation in that
yeah.
POCD.
No, but
Yeah,
it
to
is there.
develop
It
those.
does work.
Yep.
Whether it works right or not,
Yep.
I don't know.
It's
but-
not as if the properties that we have today are gonna be the only properties that we ever have, so it seems
Yeah.
like, there's gonna be, right?
Yeah.
Other properties that come up in the future, and that's where,
Yeah.
what's the
yeah,
question?
In fact, if the school properties were already addressed in that,
Yeah. it would
we
make
would
it a
have,
lot
be
easier.
having this discussion.
Yeah.
We probably would put together some little board just to say, well, let's all sit around and see what that says. And see who has dibs. Oh, housing, you really want more of it, or let's cut up a slice. And here's the different things that can go there and come up with a report to town council based directly on, it's all spelled out. Right now, it's not quite, and that's the problem. And until we have it in there, it'll stay that way. And so we have this other board that's now come together. And they're kind of empowered to come up with a report, which will be a suggestion as to how to go forward, how the town council should go forward.
It's
They can ignore it completely, but that's very good.
But we're years away with this. to
Right.
do that, right? So is that why you're trying to like
Yeah.
speed this up at another level?
Well, I don't think we can speed it up, but I think we want to take all the time, but
Yeah,
this board that's coming together would probably be around in 6 months and probably want to be looking at a school or two. For good or for
but
ill.
we're 2 years away from this, aren't we?
Yeah.
Yes, but that's also in the big picture of things, that's short time.
Yeah.
When I've been working for the town for almost 8.5 years. When I started working here, I was told by the town council, you need to do something with these excess properties. We know we need to redevelop them. We need to expand the grand list. Fires are just knocked down buildings. Tax roll just dropped. Our taxes of what we take in by millions of dollars a year. We need development. We need it now. And the town's totally behind it. Really? That's what, yes, okay, here we go. That's not where things were. So now here we are 8 years later, and only one of those properties has been approved for redevelopment, and that's under appeal right now.
Oh, really? Wow.
Sealy School.
Sealy School.
Oh, it's
Yeah.
serious.
Really? Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
not what happened.
Yeah.
So 2 years, 3 years might seem like a long time.
I think I understand that it's
Yeah.
not for long at all.
Yeah.
I get that. I work on mill cons. I'm okay
Yeah.
with long periods of time, but in the meantime, this board is gonna get set up and
Yeah.
we're gonna take some actions.
Mhm.
So unless we can at least maybe jumpstart exactly that piece for this so that there's some direction. And that way I'm gonna go back and report and say, what's going to happen is, no, we don't need to bring it to the commission necessarily because we're going to make sure that's the direction in this by the time this board gets set up. And that might do it. And if we can't, then something in between, an interim thing has to happen.
Because also some of the excess properties, the zoning is already in place for redevelopment.
Yeah.
Like Pleasant Valley School.
Yep.
Others, it's not.
Right.
And so which ones do we need to focus on? Again, yeah.
We can pick, but that's okay. I find it just infuriating, just for the record, that after we figured out what we were going to do with our schools, and as part of that process, we said, okay, we're going to close these schools. The next meeting, we should have said, okay, what are we going to do with these schools? And instead, now we're talking about the process for figuring out what to do about these schools. That's maddening, but hopefully if we have a process in place, then it becomes easy. It just rolls into it. Well, so are we saying that, no, it doesn't need to come to this group?
Well, I think only for information. I don't think.
Well, that's all it would come from. That's all it would be.
Okay, you can tell us.
Okay, well, that's all it would be. But it would be part of the process would be if we presented, this is another public forum.
It should be a report.
It'll be a report and you get to react to the report and then I take back
Yeah,
anything.
that's it, feedback.
That's all it is.
Yeah,
That's all it is.
rather than us making a
You
decision.
don't want it, you can't make.
No, I
a
don't think that's the
No,
appropriate.
I think
time
that's
to
cannot
make
this
it.
board they're talking about making decisions.
We
No
cannot
decision,
make
it's just a report.
So you can.
Okay, so we're okay with, if we become like a regular quarterly, this long a report. Okay.
And you get a 10% raise. For the report.
Thank you. About the 15.
Okay.
I just had one, last Friday, the RBS in Quaker Hill closed. And the manager there told me they were gonna be moving to Groton. Have you heard anything about that?
Nope.
They told me that they were,
You know,
The lumberyard.
Lumberyard.
Oh, the lumber.
I thought it was around bank.
That's what he said.
Oh, you
Yeah, could be. There's, I mean, you know, that there is not a lumber yard now from Westerly.
to Nyack to Norwich. That's so we are in a lumber yard,
Oh, that's at Rivers, is it Riverside?
Riverhead.
Riverhead,
Yeah,
Riverhead.
The True Value still has some.
They're closing?
Still has some stuff.
maybe there's something coming.
Riverhead's closing.
They even, he said that somewhere on 117. 4
Email.
lots or something like that.
Any,
There you go. Maybe
Thanks.
it's from them.
Thanks.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, it's down by the water.
Yeah, that's where I had my cabinets.
Yeah,
My kitchen.
yeah.
Which were not very well. Okay, report of staff.
So you all got the email from Debbie. She sent it out on our behalf, basically about the training that you're required to do by new laws. So this year, 4 hours. Attached to that email were some free ones that would satisfy it. So if you do it, let us know. We're going to keep an Excel spreadsheet so that we can report to the council when everyone has had their training.
What if we don't do it?
No consequences that
No,
I
no,
can
I
see.
didn't mean that.
No,
I
no,
ate particular
No.
ones.
right. Well, you don't have to attend those. They're going to be recorded. So you can always go back in and watch them.
Well, when I
and let
read
us know.
the thing, it sounded like they were all at a certain.
They are if they're live.
4 PM.
That's right.
on 3 different
That's
days.
right. They're live and you'll be able to ask questions at those. But if you don't want to, they're going to record it. They're going to be posted and so you can watch them at your leisure if you like.
So we're required to watch.
Not these, no, not these. These
Just
will
some
fulfill
training.
it, right? These will fulfill the training. If you
Yeah,
can
that's
find
what-
something else
I
you'd rather
signed up
do,
for those.
Yeah, that's what Debbie
classes.
says, yeah.
Like,
That's
so
great.
that, so.
That's it.
Watch them, right?
Yeah.
That's it, just watch.
That's it.
them?
Yeah.
How do you know?
Honor system.
Okay, no, that's fine. I
It
just wanted,
really is. The honor system.
there was
Yeah.
some comment in it, it said something like,
these should qualify.
It's
depending
because there are no
on-
standards. And
Oh,
so
okay.
each town can decide.
Well,
what
I mean, you know,
qualifies.
some of them seem like.
I mean, as long as you get an
Be
affordable
helpful.
housing one, that's really the only requirement. 1 hour has to be on affordable housing.
Okay,
That'll be good.
Yeah.
Excellent.
Yeah, it increases our value as volunteers. So that,
There you go. Be in demand.
but
who
then does.
who wouldn't
is
want
it-
to reestablish us as members of this great committee time and time again? We're providing the value. We hope.
Is it
Exactly.
required to be?
on the commission that you had?
We don't know yet.
The law says all commissioners shall have 4 hours of training in this year. And then after this year, you have to do 4 hours in a 2-year block.
So
Okay.
every 2 hours.
Yeah.
Not very demanding.
Right.
I mean, I guess it's just, you know, and it's not even, it's just a little time commitment. But you wouldn't want to make it's at such a level that then people are discouraged. from
Exactly.
Joining.
Exactly. Yeah. And as we see new training opportunities, we'll send them out to you. So
I think they wanted to make sure that people have a baseline of
Oh, yeah.
knowledge and understanding.
Yeah.
You guys have a continuing ed requirement?
for AICP, yeah.
And some of them were cost, it looked like.
Oh, yeah,
That one that was from the clear was not.
right. Exactly. Yeah,
No.
that's right.
There's a lot of free trainings out there. There's tons of them.
Because the COG sometimes has somebody come in and
Right.
periodic.
Yep. Yep.
10 sessions,
Mhm.
attorneys. come in.
But if I miss it, I can go back and watch it again.
You can.
Correct.
Yeah, you can. So.
I just want.
Or just ask for
Yeah.
more budget, Michael, ask for a bigger budget.
know.
for training. Right.
Thank you.
Thing, that's what I would do.
Like come to town hall and they'll have pizza.
Right. Right.
That's the budget. Report of staff, do you have any?
That's all.
No?
Yep.
And we have application dates and ASP reports. And the Connecticut Federation.
Yep.
Newsletter. Attached. Anyone have anything else?
Nope.
Entertain a motion for adjournment. Sorry, second. Moved. Seconded by Sue.
All right.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, great.
Thank you
Night,
very
Kevin.
much. Hey, one thing
Thank
I
you.
want to point out to the board, if you're ever remote, if you go into, I was listening to your conversation very intently, but if you go into the meeting information icon, which is right at the top, and then you go into the tools, and then you go into the video, you can do something that says, touch up my appearance. I'm a little surprised. You can do it. That no one mentioned that to me, that Kevin, you look a lot better at like,
You
you
look
know,
great,
minute
Kevin.
number 82. I did it.
So you can, you can grow some hair on
Yeah,
that.
it doesn't-
Give me
No,
a
it
shave.
didn't say that, Jeff. It doesn't say alter your appearance, it's touch up. So I don't know, put a mustache on or something. I don't know.
All right.
See you all soon.
Night.